We're beginning a brand new series of lessons on world evangelization, and this is the first lesson in this series. I'm calling it Helping the Helpless. Helping the Helpless. And what we're going to do, we're going to examine the story of Naaman, the leper from Syria. Our text will be taken from the book of 2 Kings, the 5th chapter. I'm going to read verses 1 through verse 5. Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He also was a mighty man of valor, but a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. And then she said to her mistress, "If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy." And Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus said the girl who is from the land of Israel." Then the king of Syria said, "Go, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." It's an interesting story, and it deals with the subject of world evangelization. One of the questions that I've been asked so many times, over and over again, is why should we bother them? Talking about people in other cultures, different nations, and they would say, why should we bother them? First of all, I think that's a bad question, because in the first place, we are not bothering them. We're helping to bring them information that they so desperately are seeking. And they will say things like this: they have their own culture and religion. That is true. That is true. But they still have not found the answers for which they are seeking. And that is why it is important that we take them the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, the way I'm going to approach this lesson is like a spiritual detective. I'm going to examine everything that I can, ask some good questions, and try to come up with some answers why we need to be involved in world evangelization. Here's the first question. The first question is, who are they? Who are they? Who are we talking about here? We're talking about people that have cultures that are different than ours. This is Naaman, the Syrian. He is not an Israelite. He is a Syrian, and he has his own language, his own culture, his own religions. And so, who are they? In this case, it's Naaman, the stranger. Now, the second question we need to ask ourselves is, do we see them as friends or as enemies? How do you view them? How do you see them? How do you look at them? In this particular story, it reads in 2 Kings, the 5th chapter and verse 1, Naaman was a great and honorable man. That's the way that God saw Naaman. That's the way that God looked at Naaman. He was a great and honorable man. We need to learn to look at people the same way God looks at people. We need to see them in the same way that God sees them. When we start doing that, it changes our whole perspective on life. Because the truth is, this is not the way that Israel looked at Naaman. No, not at all. They did not see him as a friend. They saw Naaman as the enemy general that was invading their land and capturing their people, that was conquering their country. That's the way they saw him, as the enemy. And the way that we see people is the way that we will respond to them. If we see him as the enemy, we will never take him the good news. In fact, we will look at his leprosy as the judgment of God upon him. We know that God cured him of his leprosy, but that only created more theological problems for these Israelites. This is one story that Jesus references in his teachings. And he said there were a lot of lepers in Israel during the days of the prophet Elisha, but none of them were cured except for Naaman the Syrian. And he was pointing this out. See, I don't know about you, but when I read that where it says God gave Naaman victory over Israel, he gave Syria victory because of Naaman. I look at that and that gives me theological problems because I'm looking at Naaman the wrong way. We need to see him the way God sees him. Now here's the second question. The second question is, where are they? Where are they? The answer to that question is simply this. They are all around us. All around us. Yes, the reason that we do not see these people is because we are not looking for them. See, we've got to be looking for our Naamans. We've got to see them. And the truth is, we meet them every day. We meet them on a regular basis. And yet we do not see them as hurting people. That is not the way that we look upon them. We fail to see them because we're not looking for them. So I challenge you, begin to look at people the way that God looks at people. Begin to see Naaman as a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, a man that God gave victory to Syria. Recognize God's the one that put him in that position. And that way you will be able to realize who Naaman really is. Now here's the third question I want to try to answer. The third question is simply, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? I hate to be so blunt and forward in my answer, but the truth is, Naaman is going to die. Simply put, but that is the truth. That is what is going to happen. Naaman is going to die. But let me tell you something else, my friend. Not only is Naaman going to die, every man, woman, boy, and girl that you have ever met or ever will meet, every one of them are going to die. They have a date, a destiny with death. And sooner or later, as the Bible said, it's appointed unto man once to die, and after that, the judgment. So that's what's going to happen in Naaman's life. Now, when we look at the biblical story here, the biblical story, leprosy is often symbolic of sin. And because it is a picture of what sin does within our lives, it helps us to understand the process of sin. Do you remember the writings of the Apostle James when he said, when lust hath conceived, it brings forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, brings forth death. So this is what's happening in Naaman's life. It works slowly, it works silently, but it always ends in death. And that's what's going to happen. Naaman is going to die. God help us to be sensitive to this fact that not only do we have a destiny with death, that one day ultimately all of us will stand before God, but every other person will as well. Every one of us are going to meet our Maker. Every one of us are going to stand and give an account of our lives before God. And that's what makes world evangelization so very important. Now there's a fourth question I want to answer here. The fourth question, and I don't want to sound cynical, but I believe this is an authentic question that must be answered. Why should I care? Now, because we are Christians, we want to be nice to people, but the truth of it is, many times we go our way acting as though we do not care. Now, as I studied this story, I discovered really this story is not about Naaman. He's the one that is mentioned here because he's the one that's cured from his leprosy. But the truth is, there's a little unnamed Israeli girl. And she's the heroine of the story. She's the one really that the story all centers about. If it was not for this little girl, this story would not be in our Bible. And so this little girl is the one that holds the key here. See, this little girl, instead of being full of anger and bitterness, she feels love and pity for Naaman. She actually cares about this man. She loves him. She doesn't feel hatred for him. This is a man from a different culture. He has a different language. He lives in a different nation. He has made her his slave, and yet she cares about Naaman. I really believe that this is the heart of the matter. This is what it all comes back. Do we really care? Now, the truth of it is, we should care because somebody cared about us. Somebody cared for us. Somebody shared the good news with us. And because of that, we are debtors. As the Apostle Paul put it, he said, I'm a debtor to all men. Why? Because somebody told me about Jesus Christ. Somebody told me the good news, how that I could be born of God. Somebody told me I did not have to die. That's why she is so important to this story. She holds the key to the secret of life. She knows what Naaman does not know. Naaman is desperate. Naaman has gone to his priest. He has gone to his temples. Naaman has prayed, but he is still dying from leprosy. He has not found a cure. The little girl knows something that he does not know, and she is saying, if only my master was with the prophet in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Oh, those are childlike words, and you can see this is just a little girl, just in the way that she phrases her words, the way she puts her thoughts together. She's not approaching this theologically. She's not saying, now we know the prophet can't heal, only God can heal someone. No, she's not trying to give him all the theological reasons. She just knows he doesn't have to die. She has the secret of life. Now the truth is, she can save him if she can overcome her own pain. Now I think this is the problem so many times, that we get caught in our own pain, our own troubles. And because of that, we fail to reach out to the Naamans which are around us. We see them as a part of the problem. We see him as the enemy. We don't really want to help him. But the truth is, God has been good to us. Somebody told us the good news, and because of that, we are accountable. We are in debt. We owe them something. We need to overcome the pain and hurt, the conflicts of life. All of us have them. All of us experience them, but we have the key of life. And if we will simply reach out to Naaman, Naaman does not have to die a leper. That's the good news. Now here's the fifth question that I want to try to answer. The fifth question, and I believe this is an authentic question, will it make any difference? In other words, a little girl telling a story to a grown man, will it make any difference? In other words, why would a grown man listen to a little girl? I believe that's a very, very good question. A very good question. What difference is it going to make? And I think this is the thing that trips up so many of us. Why we do not share the good news with others is simply because we don't think it'll make any difference. We don't think they will listen to us. Why would they pay attention to us? Well, look at it from Naaman's point of view. Why would he listen to a little girl? Because he knows he's dying. That's why. He knows he's dying. Leprosy is destroying his life. and he's desperate to try to find an answer. Oh, I'm afraid that there are too many times that you and I forget what it's like to really be lost. We forget what it's like to lie down at night and not know what will happen to us if we don't wake before the morning. So many people they live in the terror of that. They live constantly in the fear of dying. They don't know what's going to happen to them. God help us. God help us to understand. We have the key of life, and they will listen to us if we will only take the good news to them. See, in the story of Naaman, you can tell from the story that Naaman, he's willing to go anywhere, to pay any price to try to find life. And this is what we forget so many times. We overlook in the story is the desperation of the dying. Those people that are dying without God, without hope in this world. God help us to show compassion to them. God help us to reach out to them in love. God help us to understand that every one of them, within every person, beats the lonely heart of someone that is afraid of dying. And they will be until they find eternal life. Now, many years ago, I was traveling in Africa. I was in the country of South Africa where I was doing a series of meetings. And one day I turned on the television looking for something of interest. I found a documentary that interested me about the country. And so I sat and watched this documentary film on the village life in South Africa. And I discovered that day the answer to a question: how much is a life worth in a South African village? How much is a life worth in a South African village? As I watched the documentary, to my horror, I discovered the value of a life in a South African village is simply $1 per day. $1 per day. Now, here's the way that the story progressed. It was the story of the South African government working with the village people, trying to find a way to help the people through the epidemic of AIDS. Now, of course, the whole world has heard about AIDS, but it is Africa that has suffered the most. The 5 countries that have the highest rate of those that have died with AIDS are all African countries. South Africa is one of those countries. And so the government was looking for ways that they could help these young men that were dying, and they died by the millions throughout South Africa. There were millions of children that were left without mother or father. Their parents had died of this terrible disease. What happened was the government came up with a plan of trying to alleviate their suffering by giving them $30 a month. $30 a month and this is where I came up with the figure of $1 per day. $30 a month. It was, to help buy medicine, food, whatever they need, because they can't work and not able to go out to the fields and do labor. And so it was trying to help them through their suffering until they died. To their horror, what they discovered was the young women in the villages were going to these men who were dying with AIDS and deliberately getting themselves infected with the HIV virus. Why? So they could collect the $1 per day. Oh, I sat there, I cried like a child as I watched the stories of these young men and these young women that were dying of this terrible, terrible disease. Now, why is life so cheap in an African village? Why is life so cheap? The answer is simply, they have no hope. There is no hope. See, for the young women that are there's no hope of getting married because the young men are dying. There are no jobs for them to do. They have no future. They cannot expect to have families and to live to the next generation. And so in desperation, because they have no hope, they give up and die for $1 per day. I don't know what that does to you, but that touches me very, very deeply. When I realize the desperation that people have, the desperate conditions in which they live, so that they, maybe I shouldn't even say live, I should say exist. It's just a daily existence. And the truth is, we're not just talking about South Africa. We're not just talking about the continent of Africa. We're talking about our world. The truth is, there are multitudes that are waiting for us to come and share with them the promise of eternal life. Multitudes of them. They are all around us. Multitudes of people that are dying. God, help us to see them. Going back through the questions, who are they? Are they our friends or are they enemies? How do we look at them? These poor people, where are they located? They're all around us, friend, all around us. What is going to happen? Every person that you know, every person that you meet has a destiny with death. They're going to die. Why should I care? I should care because God cares. I should care because others care. Somebody shared the good news with me, so I am responsible to share it with them. Will it make any difference? You better believe it. No, we can't save everyone. Jesus pointed that out with the lepers that were in Israel, that not every leper in Israel was cured of their leprosy, but Naaman was. Naaman was. And so the question that we must face, the question that every Christian must face is, have we found our Naaman? Have we found our Naaman? Have we found the person in our life that is facing death, is terrified by the thoughts of tomorrow, that has lost hope? They don't know what to do. They don't know where to turn. They're willing to do anything within their power to try to find life. Like Naaman, even go to a different country, to a different religion, a different prophet, seeking life. He will go anywhere and pay any price because he's dying and he knows it. And so I challenge you, have you found your Naaman? Are you looking for your Naaman? Have you discovered him? They are all around us, my friend. God help us to find our Naaman. But then as I was studying this story, one day I realized this story is really not about Naaman. The story is about the little girl. If it was not for the little girl, we would have never heard about Naaman. If it was not for the little girl, Naaman would have never heard about the prophet Elisha. If it was not for the little girl, he would have died a leper. And so I changed my whole thoughts. I changed my whole attitude. And what I started doing, I started seeking for people that have a spirit like the little girl. Somebody that has a heart that cares for the lost. Somebody that cares about these lepers. Somebody that is willing to look beyond themselves to other people that are dying. Do we have a spirit like the little girl? I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we face as Christians. If we're not careful, the problems of this life can harden our hearts. If we're not careful, all the difficulties around us, all we begin to see is just problems. We begin to look at people like the enemy. And instead of caring about them, instead of loving them, see, this is the way the love of God is revealed. Apostle Paul said it like this. He said, Christ did not die for the righteous. He died for the ungodly. Those that were not like God. Those are the ones that he died for. If Jesus died for the ungodly, and I know he did, because I met him when I was not like him. I met him when I was dying of my own sin pollution. The wages of sin is death. I earned it. I deserved it because of the things that I've done. But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ. It changed my life. I began to look for my Naamans, and now I continue to pray, God, give me a spirit like the little girl. Give me a heart, a pure heart of love like hers, to be willing to love the man that has made me his slave, love the man that has captured me and carried me away into a foreign country, to have pity upon him because he is dying of his leprosy. Until we capture this heartbeat, helping the helpless, and understanding that everybody is going to stand before God, understanding the desperation of people that don't know God. They are afraid of God. They do not know the story of God's love. It becomes my responsibility, just like the little girl that shared the good news with Naaman. You don't have to die. There's a way you can have life. And thank God Naaman listened. He responded. And the end of the story, we find him worshiping Jehovah God as a man cured of his leprosy. It's not just a story from the Old Testament. It's a story that is repeated every day in our lives. God, help us to find our Naaman and give us a spirit like the little girl.